Close your eyes for a moment and imagine this. You're standing on a sun-bleached limestone shore, squinting against the Mediterranean glare. The year is 331 BCE. Behind you stretches the endless desert. Before you, the sapphire waters reach toward distant horizons. The wind carries salt and possibility. Beside you stands a young man, barely 25, yet already master of the known world. He points to this barren strip of land between lake and sea and tells you that here, on this desolate coast, will rise the greatest city humanity has ever conceived. You might laugh at such audacity, but you don't, because this young man is Alexander the Great, and when he dreams, the world reshapes itself to match his vision. What you cannot know, standing there in the wind with sand in your sandals, is that this city will house something even more extraordinary than its palaces and harbors. It will become home to humanity's first true attempt to gather all the knowledge in the world under one roof, a library so magnificent that over 2,000 years later, people will still whisper its name with reverence and sorrow, the Library of Alexandria. And tonight, you're going to walk through its halls, meet its scholars, and witness both its glory and its heartbreaking end. Let yourself sink deeper into this moment. Feel the ancient sun on your skin. You're about to embark on a journey through one of history's most fascinating stories, a story of ambition, wisdom, and loss. So settle in, relax, and let me take you back to a time when a library was more than just a building. It was humanity's memory, its hope, and its most precious treasure. To understand the library, you first need to understand the man whose dream made it possible. Picture yourself in Macedon, years before that day on the beach. You're walking through the gardens of Mieza, and you hear voices, a teacher and his student engaged in deep discussion. The teacher is Aristotle, perhaps the greatest mind of the ancient world. The student is young Alexander, son of King Philip II. You watch as Aristotle guides the teenage prince through questions about nature, politics, ethics, and the cosmos itself. You see something unusual happening here. Most princes of the age are learning only warfare and statecraft, but Aristotle is teaching Alexander something different, that knowledge itself is a form of power, perhaps the greatest power of all. He's teaching him to collect ideas the way other conquerors collect gold. This education plants a seed in Alexander's mind that will bloom across an empire. Watch as the young prince listens intently, his eyes alight with curiosity. You realize you're witnessing the birth of an idea that will change the world. Alexander is learning that conquering lands is one thing, but gathering wisdom, that's immortality. Now you're moving forward in time. It's 336 BCE, and you're standing in a Macedonian palace when news arrives. King Philip has been assassinated. You watch 20-year-old Alexander transform before your eyes from prince to king. Within 2 years, you find yourself marching with his army, part of an expedition that will reshape the known world. You cross into Asia Minor, and you notice something strange about this conquest. Yes, there are battles, the thunder of cavalry charges, the clash of phalanxes, but you also see Alexander stopping to visit temples, consulting with local priests, collecting scrolls and texts from every city he takes. While other soldiers loot gold, you watch Alexander's scholars carefully preserving manuscripts, documenting languages, recording customs. At Gordium, you witness him cut the famous knot with his sword, a problem solved by thinking differently, by refusing to accept traditional limitations. This, you realize, is how he approaches everything. Traditional conquerors destroy cultures. Alexander absorbs them. Now you're approaching Egypt. The year is 332 BCE. and you're part of Alexander's army marching through the desert toward the Nile Delta. You've heard stories about this ancient land: pyramids that pierce the sky, temples older than memory, wisdom that stretches back 3,000 years. When you cross into Egyptian territory, something unexpected happens. There's no resistance. Instead, you're greeted as liberators. The Egyptians have suffered under Persian rule for 2 centuries, and they see this young Macedonian as their salvation. You watch as priests approach Alexander with reverence, and you begin to understand. He's not just conquering Egypt, he's being absorbed into its ancient narrative. You accompany Alexander to the Oracle of Siwa, trekking across brutal desert for 8 days. The journey itself is harrowing: sandstorms that blind you, heat that saps your strength. But Alexander pushes forward, driven by something you can't quite name. When you finally reach the oracle, you wait outside the sacred chamber while Alexander enters alone. What happened in there, only Alexander knows for certain. But when he emerges, something has changed in his bearing. The priests had proclaimed him son of Zeus Ammon, a divine ruler. You see it in his eyes. He now believes he's destined not just to rule, but to transform the world. Travel with Alexander now along the Egyptian coast. You're both searching for something, the perfect location for his new city. You pass several promising sites, but Alexander keeps moving, as if guided by instinct or divine vision. Finally, you arrive at this narrow strip of land between the Mediterranean Sea and Lake Mareotis. Stand here with him and try to see what he sees. To your eyes, it's just limestone and sand, wind and waves. But Alexander is describing marble columns rising from the shore, harbors filled with ships from every nation, streets laid in perfect grid patterns, monuments that will make Rome jealous. He's describing not just the city, but a crossroads of civilizations, a place where East meets West, where Greek philosophy will dance with Egyptian wisdom, where Persian mathematics will merge with Phoenician astronomy. You watch as he takes out a bag of barley and begins marking the city's future boundaries on the sand, tracing the streets with grain. Suddenly, birds descend, thousands of them, devouring the barley. For a moment, everyone freezes. Is this a terrible omen? But Alexander's seer, Aristane, interprets it differently. This city will feed the whole world. Alexander calls for his architect, Dinocrates of Rhodes, and you listen as they plan something unprecedented. The city will have 2 harbors, protected by a long causeway to the island of Pharos. The streets will run in straight lines, allowing cooling winds to flow through during summer. There will be a palace quarter, a theater, gardens, and gymnasiums, and space, significant space, for something Alexander is already dreaming of: a great repository of knowledge. But you won't see this city built yet, because Alexander is restless, always moving, always conquering. Within months of founding Alexandria, you find yourself marching again toward Mesopotamia, toward Persia, toward the edge of the known world. You campaign through unimaginable distances, from the scorching deserts of Syria to the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush. You're with Alexander when he reaches India, when his exhausted army finally begs him to turn back. You see the disappointment in his eyes. He wanted to reach the edge of the world, to see the great ocean that ancient geographers said circled all lands. But even Alexander cannot push beyond human limits forever. The return journey is brutal. You cross the Gedrosian desert, and you watch as thousands die from thirst and heat. When you finally reach Babylon in 323 BCE, Alexander is planning new expeditions to Arabia, perhaps to Carthage and Rome. He seems to believe he'll live forever, that his conquest will never end. But then, on a warm June day, you stand outside his chamber and hear that he's fallen ill, a fever. Within days, this man who seemed invincible, who stood up to charging elephants and conquered empires, is dying. You're there when his generals ask him, "To whom do you leave your kingdom?" His answer is a whisper, to the strongest. You realize, with a chill, that those words will drown the world in blood. Alexander dies at 32, never seeing his city rise from the sand. But as you stand there in that Babylonian palace, you don't yet understand that his greatest legacy isn't the empire he conquered. That will fracture within years. His greatest legacy is the idea he planted, that knowledge can be gathered, preserved, and shared, that different cultures can contribute to a collective wisdom, that somewhere there should be a place where all of humanity's understanding resides. That place will be Alexandria, and though Alexander will never walk its streets, his vision will live there in the form of a library that will change the world. In our next section, you'll watch as one of Alexander's...
Open your eyes to chaos. Alexander has been dead for mere weeks, and already you can feel the empire tearing itself apart. You're standing in a council chamber where his generals, the Diadochi, the successors, are dividing the world like wolves over a carcass. The air is thick with ambition and barely concealed hostility. Watch the man in the corner, the one observing more than speaking. That's Ptolemy, son of Lagus, one of Alexander's oldest companions. While others argue over Macedon, over Greece, over the vast territories of Persia, Ptolemy has already decided what he wants. He wants Egypt. And as you'll soon discover, Ptolemy is perhaps the wisest of all the successors. You might wonder why he chooses Egypt when others grab for larger territories, for the throne of the whole empire. But Ptolemy understands something the others don't. Egypt is defendable, wealthy, and comes with 3,000 years of accumulated wisdom. Egypt isn't just land, it's a civilization unto itself. Travel with Ptolemy now as he marches toward Egypt in 323 BCE. You're part of his relatively small force, and you notice something interesting about how he operates. Unlike the other successors, who rule through fear and brutality, Ptolemy is calculating, diplomatic. When you reach Alexandria, he doesn't storm in as a conqueror. He presents himself as a continuation of Alexander's vision, as a protector of Egyptian traditions. You watch him make a spectacular political move. Alexander's body, being transported back to Macedon for burial, passes through his territory. Ptolemy hijacks the funeral cortege. You're there when Alexander's golden sarcophagus is redirected to Memphis and later to Alexandria itself. This isn't just grave robbery, it's political genius. Possessing Alexander's body gives Ptolemy legitimacy, makes Alexandria the spiritual heir to Alexander's empire. Stand in the streets of early Alexandria and look around. The city is still being built, but already you can see Alexander's vision taking physical form. The main avenue, Canopic Street, stretches for 5 kilometers, so wide that chariots can race along it. The palaces are rising in the eastern harbor district. The causeway to Pharos Island, the Hypostadion, is under construction, creating 2 magnificent harbors. But Alexandria is more than just impressive architecture. You notice something unusual as you walk through the markets. Here, Egyptian priests in linen robes bargain with Greek merchants. Jewish scholars debate with Persian astronomers. You hear a dozen languages in a single afternoon. Ptolemy is creating something unprecedented, a truly cosmopolitan city, a place where cultures don't just coexist, but actively merge and create something new. Now you're being summoned to the palace. It's around 295 BCE, and Ptolemy, now well established as ruler of Egypt, is meeting with his advisors. You enter a chamber where scrolls and tablets are stacked on every surface. Ptolemy has aged. He's in his 60s now, but his eyes still burn with intellectual curiosity. Listen as he lays out his vision. He wants Alexandria to be more than just a political capital or trade hub. He wants it to be the intellectual capital of the world. And for that, he needs a repository of all human knowledge, a library unlike anything that has ever existed. You've heard of libraries before. The ancient Near East has temple archives, collections of clay tablets recording administrative details and religious texts. Aristotle had a personal library. But what Ptolemy is describing is different in scope and ambition. He wants every book, every scroll, every piece of recorded knowledge from every civilization. He wants copies of Homer and Hesiod, yes, but also Zoroastrian texts, Egyptian medical papyri, Babylonian astronomical tables, Indian mathematics, Jewish scriptures, everything. Meet Demetrius of Phalerum, the man Ptolemy has chosen to make this dream real. Demetrius is an Athenian, a former student of Aristotle's Lyceum, and he understands both the philosophical importance and practical challenges of this project. You watch him sketch out plans, calculate costs, discuss logistics. But the library won't stand alone. Ptolemy and Demetrius are planning something even more ambitious: the Museum, the Temple of the Muses. Walk with them through the palace quarter as they designate the space. You see an area being set aside that's larger than most ancient cities' temples. Let me explain what makes the Museum revolutionary. It's not just a library, it's the world's first true research institution. Imagine a place where scholars are given rooms, food, and a stipend to do nothing but study and think. No teaching obligations, no political duties, just pure research. In the ancient world, where most intellectuals survive by tutoring wealthy families or flattering kings, this is unprecedented. You watch as the first buildings take shape. There are lecture halls where you can hear debates about the nature of the cosmos, gardens where botanists cultivate plants from across the known world, a zoo housing exotic animals for study, elephants from India, snakes from Africa, birds from Persia, astronomical observatories equipped with the finest instruments, dissection rooms where anatomists, for the first time in Greek history, are permitted to study human cadavers, and at the heart of it all, the library itself. Now you're witnessing the most ambitious collection project in human history. Ptolemy has issued a decree that's both simple and staggering. Every book that enters Egypt must be copied for the library. You're stationed at Alexandria's harbor, and you watch this policy being enforced. A merchant ship arrives from Athens. The port officials board it, and along with inspecting cargo, they search for books. They find a traveling scholar with a collection of plays, including some rare works by Euripides and Sophocles. The scholar protests as the scrolls are confiscated, but he's given a receipt and promised copies. Follow those scrolls into the library. You enter a scriptorium, a vast room filled with scribes. Each sits at a desk, carefully copying texts onto fresh papyrus. The work is meticulous. One scribe reads aloud from the original, while another transcribes. Then a third scribe checks the copy against the original for errors. The original, called the ship's version in library records, is kept for the library's collection. The copy is returned to the original owner, sometimes months later. This happens constantly. Ships from across the Mediterranean arrive, and the library's collection grows. But Ptolemy isn't content with passive collection. You join royal agents sent to Athens, to Rhodes, to Pergamum, to Antioch, to Babylon. These agents carry chests of gold and royal letters of introduction. Their mission? Buy every book they can find. You're in Athens when one of Ptolemy's agents makes an extraordinary purchase. Through intermediaries, he's negotiating for the official state archives, the master copies of the great Athenian tragedies, the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. These aren't just valuable, they're sacred to the Athenians, their cultural patrimony. The Athenians are reluctant, But Ptolemy offers something irresistible: 15 talents of silver as security, a fortune equivalent to years of state revenue. The deal is, Egypt will copy the texts and return the precious originals. You escort these irreplaceable manuscripts back to Alexandria, but here's where you witness Ptolemy's ruthlessness in service of knowledge. When the copies are made, Ptolemy looks at the originals and makes a decision that shocks even his advisors. He keeps the originals for Alexandria and sends the copies back to Athens. The 15 talents? He forfeits them without hesitation. To Ptolemy, those original manuscripts are worth any price. Years pass, and you watch the library transform into something magnificent. You're allowed to enter its halls, and the sight takes your breath away. Imagine walking through corridors lined with shelves, but instead of the books you know from your time, these shelves hold scrolls, thousands upon thousands of papyrus scrolls, each carefully labeled and cataloged. The main building is an architectural marvel. You walk through a columned entrance into a vast central hall. Natural light floods in through high windows designed to illuminate without damaging the delicate papyrus. Side chambers branch off in every direction: reading rooms, cataloging spaces, storage areas specially designed to protect scrolls from humidity and pests. Stop in front of a particular shelf and read the labels. Here are multiple copies of Homer's Iliad. Not just one version, but dozens, collected from different cities, each with slight variations in the text. Next to them,
You wake up in Alexandria, and the year is 250 BCE. The library has been operating for about 40 years now, and it's reached a level of magnificence that surpasses even its founders' dreams. Step outside into the morning light, and you'll see scholars from every corner of the known world walking toward the Mauseon for another day of research and discovery. This is the library's golden age, and you're about to meet some of the most brilliant minds in human history. These aren't just names in dusty textbooks to you anymore. They're your colleagues, your friends, people you'll dine with, argue with, learn from. Take a deep breath of the Mediterranean air. Feel the excitement in your chest, and prepare to witness genius in action. Walk with me to meet a man whose nickname is Beta, not because he's second-rate, but because he's second-best at everything. Eratosthenes of Cyrene is a mathematician, geographer, poet, athlete, and music theorist. He's brilliant at all of them, but not quite the absolute best at any single one. Yet what he's about to do will be remembered longer than the work of any specialist. You find Eratosthenes in his study, surrounded by scrolls and geometric diagrams. He's been appointed head librarian, and he's using the library's resources to pursue an audacious goal. He wants to measure the Earth. Listen as he explains his reasoning to you. He's heard that in Syene, far south along the Nile, the sun shines directly down a well at noon during the summer solstice, meaning the sun is directly overhead, casting no shadow. But here in Alexandria, at that exact same moment, vertical objects cast shadows. This means the Earth must be curved. You watch as he sets up his experiment. On the summer solstice, you help him place a vertical stake, a gnomon, in Alexandria's main square. At exactly noon, when the sun is highest, you measure the angle of the shadow. It's about 7.2 degrees from vertical. Now comes Eratosthenes' genius. He knows that Syene is approximately 5,000 stadia south of Alexandria. This distance has been measured by royal surveyors. If 7.2 degrees represents 5,000 stadia, then a full circle, 360 degrees, would be, you do the calculation together, about 250,000 stadia. That's the Earth's circumference. You realize what this means. Eratosthenes has just measured the Earth using nothing but shadows and geometry, and his answer is remarkably accurate, within 2 to 15% of the modern measurement, depending on which stadium length he used. You're standing next to a man who has grasped the size of your entire world using only his mind and simple tools. But Eratosthenes isn't done revolutionizing your understanding of the cosmos. He introduces you to the works of Aristarchus of Samos, who visited the library years earlier. You unroll Aristarchus's treatises, and what you read shakes your conception of reality. Aristarchus proposes something radical. The Earth isn't the center of the universe. Instead, the Earth and other planets revolve around the Sun. Moreover, the Earth rotates on its axis, which explains the daily motion of the stars. You feel dizzy reading this, not from the content's complexity, but from its implications. Everything you've believed about your place in the cosmos is wrong. Most people reject Aristarchus's heliocentric model. It seems absurd. If the Earth is moving, why don't we feel it? Why don't objects fall off? But here in the library, scholars take the idea seriously, debate it, refine it. Aristarchus has also calculated the relative sizes and distances of the Sun and Moon. His methods are ingenious, though his measurements are off due to the crude instruments available. You realize that Aristarchus has anticipated Copernicus by 18 centuries. The knowledge is here, in these scrolls, waiting for a time when humanity is ready to accept it. In another wing of the Mauseon, you attend a lecture by a geometer. Actually, Euclid himself has been dead for some time, but his work, The Elements, is the foundation of mathematical education at the library. You sit with other students as a scholar walks you through Proposition 47 of Book 1, the Pythagorean theorem. But you're not just learning that the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other sides. You're learning how to think, how to build from basic assumptions, axioms, to complex conclusions through pure logic. Euclid's Elements isn't just a math textbook. It's a blueprint for rational thought itself. You spend months studying the Elements, all 13 books of it. Geometry, number theory, irrational numbers, solid geometry, each concept building on the last with perfect logical rigor. You understand why this work will remain the standard mathematics textbook for over 2,000 years. One day, excitement ripples through the library. Archimedes of Syracuse is visiting. You rush to the lecture hall where he's presenting his latest work, and you squeeze into a packed room. Archimedes is already legendary. Stories of his inventions and mathematical breakthroughs have spread across the Mediterranean. Watch as he demonstrates a principle he's discovered. He immerses various objects in water and shows that each displaces a volume of liquid equal to the volume of the submerged portion. Any object, wholly or partially immersed in a fluid, is buoyed up by a force equal to the weight of the fluid displaced by the object. You're witnessing the birth of hydrostatics. But Archimedes isn't here just to lecture. Like all visiting scholars, he's come to use the library's resources. You help him search through Egyptian and Babylonian mathematical texts, looking for earlier work on calculating the areas and volumes of curved figures. He's developing a method, using infinitesimals, that won't be fully understood until the development of calculus nearly 2 millennia later. One evening, you dine with Archimedes, and he shows you designs for incredible machines. Compound pulleys that let one person move a loaded ship, war engines that can lift enemy vessels out of the water, burning mirrors that focus sunlight. He says, "Give me a place to stand, and I shall move the earth." Meet another mathematical giant, Apollonius of Perga. You become his assistant, helping him with the massive work he's writing on conic sections, the curves you get when you slice a cone at different angles, circles, ellipses, parabolas, and hyperbolas. You might think this is abstract, useless mathematics, but Apollonius shows you the beauty in these curves, the elegant relationships between them. You don't know yet that 18 centuries in your future, Kepler will discover that planets move in ellipses, or that engineers will use parabolas to design everything from telescopes to satellite dishes. You're studying shapes that will define the universe's motion and humanity's technology. The work is painstaking. You help Apollonius write and rewrite propositions, checking proofs, drawing precise diagrams. The library provides everything needed: papyrus, ink, compasses, straight edges. More importantly, it provides time, the precious luxury of pursuing knowledge without worrying about survival or patronage. Years later, you're working with Hero, an engineer and mathematician who's pushing the boundaries of practical technology. Open your eyes, and you're standing before the library's main entrance. It's dawn, and you're about to take a journey through the collections themselves to really understand what it means for a building to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls representing all human knowledge. Take a deep breath and step through the massive bronze doors. The first thing that strikes you is the smell. Papyrus has a distinct, slightly sweet scent, and here, with hundreds of thousands of scrolls, it's overwhelming. There's also the faint aroma of cedar oil, which is rubbed on the scrolls to protect them from insects and decay. And underneath it all, the mustiness that comes from any place where organic materials are stored in a warm, humid climate. Your eyes adjust to the interior light. The main hall soars above you, its ceiling supported by columns of polished granite. Sunlight angles in through cleverly placed windows near the roof, bright enough to read by, but indirect enough that the precious scrolls aren't damaged by constant exposure. The walls are lined with niches, each holding dozens of scrolls in wooden or clay containers called capsa. Let me guide you through the collections, section by section. You're about to see treasures that will make you understand why the loss of this library is considered one of history's greatest tragedies. Start in the literature section, because this is where the library began. You walk along rows of scrolls containing every major work of Greek literature. Here are multiple copies of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, not just any copies, but versions collected from different cities, each with its own textual variations. Library scholars have compared these versions, marking differences, trying to establish what Homer actually wrote. Pull out a scroll at random. It's Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, one of the master copies borrowed from Athens, or rather, the original that Ptolemy kept after sending back a copy. Unroll it carefully and you see not just the text, but marginal notes added by scholars. These notes discuss word choices, explain historical references, propose alternative readings. This scroll isn't just a text, it's a conversation across generations. Move deeper into the section. Here are the lost plays, works by Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides that you know from your time are lost to history. But here they are, waiting to be read. You unroll a scroll containing Sophocles' Epigone, one of his lost plays about the sons of the seven against Thebes. You're reading words that no one in your modern era has seen for 2,000 years. The tragic irony isn't lost on you. All of these lost works are right here, preserved, cataloged. They'll be lost later when the library's contents are destroyed or dispersed. You're looking at ghosts of the future, texts that are alive now but will become mere references in later scholars' works, titles without content, stories reduced to fragments. Walk now to the philosophy section, and your breath catches. Here are works by the pre-Socratic philosophers, thinkers whose ideas you know only through fragments and secondhand reports. But here they are, complete. You unroll Heraclitus' complete writings, not just the fragments that will survive. His philosophy of constant change, of fire as the fundamental element, of the unity of opposites, all laid out in his own words. Next to Heraclitus sit scrolls by Democritus, the atomist. You've learned in your time that Democritus proposed atoms, indivisible particles composing all matter. But here you can read his entire system, not just physics, but ethics, epistemology, even literary criticism. Most of this will be lost, but for now, it's all here, waiting. Here's Aristotle's library, or most of it. After his death, his books were hidden for years before being recovered and brought to Alexandria. You find his esoteric works, the detailed treatises meant for advanced students. Physics, metaphysics, Nicomachean ethics, politics, poetics, these will survive. But here are also works that won't make it. Dialogues he wrote in his youth, works on specific animals now extinct or unknown, detailed observations of particular political systems. And here's something that makes you shiver with excitement and sadness. Aristotle's work on comedy. In your time, his poetics survives only in the section on tragedy. The section on comedy has been lost. But here it is, intact. You could read it right now, understanding Aristotle's complete theory of drama. But you know this scroll will disappear into history, and scholars 2 millennia hence will write countless papers speculating about what it might have contained. Move to the mathematics and science wing. Here is where you really understand how much knowledge can be lost. You see astronomical observations by Babylonian priests recorded over centuries, detailing planetary positions, eclipses, and celestial phenomena. These observations, spanning hundreds of years, are astonishingly accurate and form the empirical foundation for Hellenistic astronomy. Pick up a scroll from India. Yes, the library has collected works from India, brought by traders and scholars traveling the long routes east. This scroll discusses a numerical system that uses place value and includes a symbol for zero, concepts that won't reach Europe for centuries. Indian mathematicians have discovered trigonometric principles and calculated pi to several decimal places. Their work is here, available, though most Greek scholars don't yet fully appreciate its revolutionary potential. Here are medical texts from Egypt, some dating back over 1,000 years. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical treatise describing 48 cases of injuries, each with examination, diagnosis, and treatment. The Ebers Papyrus, a vast medical encyclopedia listing diseases, symptoms, and remedies. These texts represent centuries of Egyptian medical knowledge, and library physicians are studying them, translating them, learning from them. You find Babylonian mathematical tablets, not papyrus, but the original clay tablets carefully preserved. These show advanced algebra, geometric calculations, and sophisticated number theory. The Babylonians understood the Pythagorean theorem centuries before Pythagoras. They calculated square roots and cube roots. They developed tables for multiplication and reciprocals. All of this knowledge preserved in clay and now protected in Alexandria's climate-controlled storage rooms. In the geography section, you find treasures that reveal how much the ancient world knew about itself. Here is Hecataeus' Periasis, a comprehensive description of the known world, with maps. Not just simple sketches, but detailed maps showing coastlines, rivers, cities, even estimates of distances. You unroll Pythias' account of his journey to the far north, to Britain, and possibly even further, to Thule, perhaps Norway or Iceland. He describes the midnight sun, freezing seas, and people living at the edge of the habitable world. Most later scholars will dismiss his account as fantasy, but here's his original report, and you can see it's the genuine observation of an explorer, not fabrication. Here are accounts of Alexander's eastern campaigns, including descriptions of India, Bactria, and the Hindu Kush. Megasthenes' Indica, a detailed account of Mauryan India, its cities, customs, government, and wildlife, sits on the shelf. In your time, this work survives only in fragments quoted by other authors, but here it is, complete, describing Chandragupta Maurya's empire, the city of Pataliputra, Indian philosophy, and society. You find Phoenician navigation logs, practical documents describing sea routes, ports, hazards, and trading opportunities across the Mediterranean and beyond. These aren't literary works. They're the real records of sailors and merchants, the kind of practical knowledge that usually disappears because no one thinks to preserve it. But Alexandria has preserved even this. Walk now to a special section, texts of religious and mystical significance from various cultures. Here is where you really see the library's ambition to collect all knowledge regardless of culture or belief system. The Hebrew scriptures are here in both Hebrew and the new Greek translation, the Septuagint. But there are also Jewish commentaries, legal interpretations, wisdom literature, the intellectual production of an entire culture preserved. Here are Zoroastrian texts brought from Persia, the Avesta and its commentaries, describing the cosmic struggle between good and evil, between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. These texts deeply influence Persian culture and religion, and through Persian contact with the Greek world, will influence Western thought. Egyptian religious texts fill an entire wing. The Book of the Dead, funerary texts with spells and guidance for the afterlife in dozens of versions. Temple archives describing rituals, festivals, and mythological narratives. These texts represent 3,000 years of Egyptian religious thought, and library scholars are working to understand them and translate them. You find mysterious texts too, writings attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, blending Egyptian and Greek mysticism, alchemical treatises attempting to transform base metals into gold, yes, but also exploring the nature of matter and change. Astrological texts from various cultures describing how celestial bodies influence. You wake to a different Alexandria. Years have passed since you first explored the library's golden age, and something has changed in the air. The date is 145 BCE, and you're about to witness how politics can threaten even the most cherished institutions. Walk with me to streets that feel subtly different. There's tension here now, a sense of unease beneath the cosmopolitan bustle. The Ptolemaic dynasty has ruled Egypt for nearly 2 centuries, and the cracks are beginning to show. You're heading to the palace district, and you can hear shouting even before you see the crowd. A mob has gathered, angry faces illuminated by torches, despite the daylight. They're calling for someone's blood, and you feel your stomach tighten when you realize whose. Scholars from the Museon. This is something new and terrifying. Until now, the library and Museon existed somewhat apart from political turbulence, protected by royal patronage and universal respect for learning. But that protection is crumbling. Let me show you why. Push through the crowd carefully, and you'll see the cause of today's unrest. Ptolemy VIII, Physcon, Fatty, has just returned to Alexandria after years of civil war with his brother. He's a grotesque figure, enormously obese, cruel, and paranoid. Unlike his predecessors, who valued learning, Physcon sees intellectuals as potential threats to his power. You watch in horror as royal guards raid the Museon. Scholars are dragged from their rooms, their research scattered. Some are imprisoned, others expelled from Egypt entirely. The charge against them? Supporting Physcon's enemies during the Civil War. But really, it's simpler. Physcon doesn't understand or value intellectual work, and he resents the scholars' independence. Follow one group of scholars as they're marched to the harbor and forced onto ships. These aren't criminals, they're mathematicians, poets, physicians, geographers. They're being exiled, and they carry what they can of their work. You recognize some faces. Scholars you've dined with, learned from, debated with. Now they're refugees, forced to seek patronage in other kingdoms. This diaspora will have an unintended consequence. These exiled scholars will spread Alexandrian learning throughout the Mediterranean world, to Athens, Rhodes, Pergamum, Antioch, eventually to Rome. They become teachers, advisors, court scholars, carrying Alexandria's intellectual heritage with them. But for the library itself, the loss is devastating. The community of scholars that made it vibrant is being destroyed. Despite Physcon's purge, the library itself survives. You return to its halls, and the scrolls are still there, the shelves still full. But walk through the reading rooms, and you'll notice the difference. Where once there were dozens of scholars engaged in research, now there are only a handful, working quietly, fearfully, avoiding anything that might be seen as politically sensitive. Meet Aristarchus of Samothrace, the head librarian during this dark period. You find him in his office, looking exhausted and decades older than his years. He's trying to maintain the library's standards, continuing the work of cataloging and preservation, but it's like holding back the tide with bare hands. The king demands that we include more Egyptian texts, Aristarchus tells you wearily, not for scholarly reasons, but to emphasize his legitimacy as pharaoh. And certain Greek texts that criticize kingship, those are to be removed or reinterpreted. You hear the bitterness in his voice. The library is being turned from a universal repository of knowledge into a tool of royal propaganda. But Aristarchus and the remaining scholars resist quietly. They continue copying texts accurately, maintaining the catalog honestly, preserving works even when officially discouraged. They're walking a dangerous line, staying politically compliant enough to survive while maintaining scholarly integrity wherever possible. Years pass, and you witness the Ptolemaic dynasty descending into chaos. Physcon eventually dies in 116 BCE, but his death doesn't bring peace. Instead, it triggers a succession crisis that will plague Egypt for decades. You watch as family members fight each other for the throne, brothers against sisters, mothers against sons, spouses against each other. Stand in the palace one night when Ptolemy IX murders his own mother, Cleopatra III. The violence that was once directed at foreign enemies or political rivals is now consuming the royal family itself. And with each succession struggle, the library suffers. Royal patronage becomes uncertain. Funding for acquisitions dries up. Maintenance is deferred. These seem like small things, but you understand their significance. The infrastructure that preserves knowledge is decaying. But there's a larger threat looming, and you can see it in the increasing number of Roman visitors to Alexandria. Rome is rising, transforming from republic to empire, and Egypt has caught its attention. You overhear conversations in the library between nervous scholars discussing rumors. Rome might intervene in Egyptian politics, might impose a protectorate, might even annex Egypt entirely. In 80 BCE, you witness something that would have been unthinkable a century earlier. A Ptolemaic king installed by Rome. Ptolemy XII Auletes, the flute player, owes his throne to Roman support, and he knows it. You watch him send enormous bribes to Roman officials, desperately trying to maintain their favor. This money comes from somewhere, from Egypt's treasury, which means less for cultural institutions like the library. Auletes visits the library occasionally, but you can tell he doesn't really understand its importance. He sees it as a prestige object, something that makes Alexandria seem impressive to Roman visitors. He doesn't grasp that it's a living institution, requiring constant investment and care. When finances are tight, the library's budget is cut. When political crisis strikes, the library's concerns are ignored. Yet scholarly work continues, though changed in character. You attend lectures that are less ambitious than before. Instead of revolutionary new ideas, you hear scholars working on commentaries, explaining and preserving earlier thinkers' work rather than blazing new trails. It's not that the current scholars lack talent, but the atmosphere of constant political instability makes sustained, ambitious research difficult. Meet some scholars still working in this troubled period. There's Didymus Calcanterus, Bronze Guts, nicknamed for his phenomenal work ethic. He's written thousands of commentaries on classical texts, preserving knowledge of earlier scholarship even as original sources are being lost. His work isn't as exciting as Eratosthenes' Measuring the Earth, but it's crucial. He's building a bridge of knowledge across a dark period. You work alongside Didymus in the library, helping him compare manuscripts, checking references, copying passages. The work is painstaking and thankless, but essential. Didymus is ensuring that even if political chaos continues, the knowledge itself will survive in some form. One thing you notice increasingly, Alexandria is becoming intellectually isolated. Once scholars traveled freely throughout the Hellenistic world, sharing ideas, visiting multiple centers of learning, but the constant political instability makes travel dangerous. Pirates infest the Mediterranean, taking advantage of weak Ptolemaic naval power. War between Rome and various Eastern kingdoms disrupts traditional routes. You meet a scholar who tried to visit Pergamum, Alexandria's rival in collecting books. His journey took 3 times longer than it should have, and he was nearly killed twice by bandits. He says it's not worth it anymore, sadly. Better to stay in Alexandria and work with what we have. You realize that human knowledge isn't just stored in Alexandria. It's being created in many places. And as Alexandria becomes cut off from other centers of learning, humanity's intellectual network is fragmenting. Knowledge that might have been shared is staying localized. Discoveries made in India or China won't reach the Mediterranean for centuries, if ever. In the library itself, you notice troublable changes in culture. A new librarian is appointed, not because of scholarly distinction, but because he's connected to the royal court. He knows little about organization or preservation, and he makes decisions that horrify you. Valuable scrolls are given as gifts to court favorites. The climate-controlled storage rooms are repurposed for palace storage. Funding, meant for copying deteriorating manuscripts, is diverted to pay for royal festivals. When scholars protest, they're reminded that the library exists at royal pleasure and can be shut down entirely if the king wishes. You watch as the professional library staff, people who dedicated their lives to preserving knowledge, are replaced with political appointees. Standards decline. Cataloging becomes
Open your eyes to a new era. The year is 30 BCE, and everything is changed. Cleopatra is dead,
killed by her own hand rather than face Roman captivity. Mark Antony is dead. The Ptolemaic dynasty, 3 centuries of Greek rule in Egypt, is finished. And you're standing in Alexandria watching Roman legions march through the streets, claiming Egypt not as an allied kingdom, but as the personal property of Emperor Augustus. You're about to experience what it means for the library when a city built to be a capital becomes merely a provincial city, when a dynasty that valued learning is replaced by an empire with different priorities. Walk with me through this transformed Alexandria and see how the greatest library in the ancient world adapts to survive in the Roman age. The immediate aftermath of Roman conquest is chaotic. You watch as Augustus's agents inventory royal property, and the library is on that list. The new prefect of Egypt, Augustus doesn't trust the Egyptians enough to call him king, visits the library with a calculating eye. "How much does this cost to maintain?" he asks, examining scrolls with the eye of someone assessing a financial burden rather than a cultural treasure. You hear scholars nervously explaining the costs: salaries for librarians and copyists, materials for conservation, funds for new acquisitions, building maintenance, and security. The prefect nods, does calculations. You can see him thinking, is this worth the expense? Rome has captured Egypt primarily for its grain production. Egypt feeds Rome now, shipping vast quantities of wheat across the Mediterranean. Everything else, including cultural institutions, is secondary to that economic function. For weeks, you're uncertain whether the library will survive. But eventually, word comes, Augustus will maintain the library. Not at its former levels of funding, and not with the same independence it enjoyed under the Ptolemies, but it will survive. You breathe easier, though you understand that survival comes with conditions. Under the Ptolemies, the library was an instrument of royal prestige, a way for Greek kings to establish cultural legitimacy in Egypt. The Ptolemies needed the library to prove they were enlightened rulers, proper heirs to Alexander's vision. So they poured resources into it, competed with other kingdoms to collect the most books, attracted the greatest scholars. Rome's relationship with the library is different. Stand in the forum and listen to Augustus's proclamation about Egypt. He emphasizes Rome's conquest, the efficiency of Roman administration, the wealth flowing to Rome. The library is mentioned almost as an afterthought, a curiosity, a tourist attraction for educated Romans visiting Egypt, but not central to Roman identity or interests. You notice the change in the library's role. Under the Ptolemies, it was a center of original research, a place where scholars pushed the boundaries of knowledge. Under Rome, it's becoming more of a repository and teaching institution. Original research continues, but the emphasis shifts toward preserving and explaining what previous generations discovered. Watch as a new type of visitor arrives: wealthy Romans on cultural tours, educated aristocrats who want to say they've seen the famous Library of Alexandria. They walk through with guides, admire the vast collection, maybe read a few scrolls, then move on to the next site. For them, the library is like the pyramids, impressive, ancient, exotic, but not particularly relevant to their lives. You meet one such visitor whose observations will prove valuable to historians. Strabo, a Greek geographer working under Roman patronage, has come to Alexandria to research his massive geographical treatise. He's different from the casual tourists. He's a serious scholar who spends months in the library, using its resources. Help Strabo access scrolls about distant lands: India, Arabia, Britain, Germania. He's compiling knowledge from hundreds of sources, creating a comprehensive description of the known world. As you work with him, he shares observations about Alexandria and its library. It's still magnificent, Strabo tells you one day, but it's living on its past. Most of the scholars here now are focused on commenting on earlier thinkers rather than discovering new things. It's scholarship, certainly, but it's not the same as the golden age I've read about. You know he's right. The culture has changed. The library still attracts scholars, still holds its vast collection, but the intellectual ferment of earlier centuries has cooled. Partly it's funding. Roman patronage is reliable, but not generous. Partly it's the changed political context. Alexandria is no longer the capital of an independent kingdom, but a provincial city. And partly it's the natural life cycle of institutions. Even the greatest eventually decline from their peak. But don't assume the Roman period is entirely a story of decline. Scholarship continues, sometimes brilliantly. Let me introduce you to some of the Roman-era scholars working in or connected to the library. Meet Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher who's synthesizing Greek philosophy with Jewish theology. You attend his lectures, where he interprets Hebrew scriptures through the lens of Platonic philosophy. His work will profoundly influence early Christian theology, helping Christianity engage with Greek intellectual traditions. Or spend time with Claudius Ptolemy, not the dynasty, but an astronomer and geographer working in Alexandria in the 2nd century CE. You help him access the centuries of astronomical observations stored in the library, Babylonian records, Greek calculations, Egyptian star charts. He's synthesizing all this into comprehensive works, the Alchemist on astronomy and the Geography describing the known world. You watch as Ptolemy develops a sophisticated mathematical model of the universe. Yes, it's geocentric and fundamentally wrong, but it's mathematically elegant and predictively powerful. His work will dominate astronomy for 1,400 years. And he's doing exactly what the library was designed to enable, bringing together knowledge from multiple sources and cultures to create new understanding. You discover that the library has evolved to serve new functions. One development particularly interests you: the growth of what might be called bibliotherapy or therapeutic reading. Physicians prescribe specific texts for patients suffering from various mental disturbances or seeking moral improvement. Visit the section of the library dedicated to this purpose. You find scrolls organized by therapeutic value: tragedies for patients who need emotional catharsis, comedies for those suffering from melancholy, philosophical works for those seeking peace of mind, and mathematical texts for those who need mental discipline. A physician explains the theory to you. The soul can become disordered just like the body. Reading the right texts in the right order can restore balance. Comedy loosens what's too tight, tragedy purges unhealthy emotions, philosophy straightens twisted thinking. You're witnessing an early form of what your time would call reading therapy or bibliotherapy. The library isn't just storing knowledge, it's actively using that knowledge for healing, for improving human well-being. It's a beautiful adaptation of the library's mission to the needs of the Roman age. Walk now to the Serapeum, the daughter library located in the temple complex of Serapis. Since Caesar's fire, this institution has grown in importance. It now holds perhaps 42,000 scrolls, a substantial collection in its own right, though dwarfed by the main library. The Serapeum serves several functions. It's a backup repository, protecting against the loss of unique texts if disaster strikes the main library again. It's also more accessible to ordinary Alexandrians. The main library in the Palace District is somewhat exclusive, while the Serapeum welcomes a broader range of visitors. You spend an afternoon in the Serapeum's reading rooms. The atmosphere is different from the main library, less elite, more democratic. Here are students from modest backgrounds copying texts they can't afford to buy, merchants consulting geographical works before trading expeditions, local scholars working on projects too minor for the main library's attention. The Serapeum also serves the religious function its name suggests. The cult of Serapis, a syncretic deity combining Greek and Egyptian elements, attracts worshippers who see knowledge-seeking as a form of religious devotion. You watch as people pray before studying, thank the gods after discovering insights, treat the act of reading as spiritually significant. In the 2nd century CE, you meet one of the most significant medical scholars of antiquity, Galen of Pergamum. Though Galen does most of his work in Rome, he visits Alexandria specifically to access its unparalleled collection of medical texts. Follow Galen through the medical sections of the library. He's searching for works by Herophilus and Erasistrus, the pioneering anatomists from centuries earlier. You help him find Egyptian surgical papyri, Indian texts on medicinal plants, Greek works on the theory of humors. Galen is doing something remarkable. He's synthesizing centuries of medical knowledge into a comprehensive system. His work will dominate Western medicine for over 1,000 years, and it's only possible because of the library's
As you move into the 3rd century CE, you notice a new force rising in Alexandria: Christianity. The city becomes one of the early centers of this new faith, a place where scripture, philosophy, and debate collide under the desert sun. In its narrow streets, preachers stand beside philosophers, both trying to claim the same truth in different words. The city that once preserved all knowledge now begins to divide over which knowledge is worth preserving. You pass through the agora and see small crowds forming around men quoting the Gospels instead of Homer, the prophets instead of Plato. Their words are quiet but magnetic, promising salvation rather than speculation. For centuries, Alexandria had been the capital of curiosity. Now it was becoming the capital of conviction. Inside the library's marble halls, you sense tension. Some scholars welcome this new religion with fascination. They begin studying its texts as they would any other, comparing manuscripts, analyzing meanings, searching for the historical Jesus as they once searched for the real Homer. Others, however, view it as a threat, not because of what it says, but because of what it rejects: the idea that knowledge is endless, that the universe is best understood through observation, not revelation. The scrolls and the scriptures begin to coexist uneasily. The library scholars still debate astronomy, mathematics, and medicine. But outside its doors, the people whisper of miracles, prophecy, and divine truth. Knowledge is shifting from the measurable to the mystical. By the time you reach the 4th century CE, Christianity has grown from a persecuted sect into a state religion under Emperor Constantine. Pagan temples are emptied or converted. Statues of old gods are defaced, their marble faces chipped by hands that once prayed to them. Even philosophy itself becomes suspect, associated with the old order, with pride, with questioning divine authority. And yet, ironically, Christianity also inherits much from the library's intellectual world. Early Christian thinkers, Origen, Clement of Alexandria, and others, emerge from the same scholarly tradition. They quote Plato as easily as scripture, building bridges between Athens and Jerusalem. Their writings are filled with the echoes of the library, the careful reasoning, the layered metaphors, the love of hidden meaning. Christianity, at least in Alexandria, becomes a new kind of scholarship, one that seeks not just to understand the world, but to justify its creation. But even bridges can become battlegrounds. Over time, the spirit of inquiry that once defined Alexandria turns inward. The questions shift from "what is the universe made of?" to "what should we believe?" And when questions concern belief, disagreement becomes dangerous. You notice it first as murmurs in the lecture halls. Scholars argue about theology, about the nature of Christ, about whether he was divine, human, or both. These debates grow so intense they spill into the streets. Students, dock workers, merchants, all take sides in arguments that no longer concern stars or geometry, but salvation.
The same city that once compared manuscripts now compares miracles. By the late 4th century, under Emperor Theodosius, Christianity becomes not just accepted, but enforced. Pagan temples are outlawed. The Serapeum, the great temple dedicated to Serapis, long associated with the library's collection, is targeted. For centuries, the Serapeum had housed part of the library scrolls, serving as a refuge for knowledge after the first Great Fire. Now it becomes the stage for another act of destruction. The Serapeum was a marvel. Columns of red granite, steps carved in white marble, towering over the city like a mountain of thought. Inside, beneath a dome of blue and gold, stood the colossal statue of Serapis, a god meant to unify Greek and Egyptian belief. But when the decree comes, the temple is stormed. Monks and soldiers tear down its idols. Scrolls, if any remained, are trampled or burned in the chaos. No one records exactly how many texts were lost. Some say the library had already declined long before. Others insist this was its final death. But standing there, you can feel that something irreversible has happened. Not just the burning of parchment, but the silencing of a spirit. The city itself seems quieter afterwards. The scholars flee. The schools empty. The new bishops speak of faith and discipline, not curiosity. And yet, even as the empire crumbles, the embers of knowledge still flicker, hidden in monasteries, preserved by Christian scribes, who, perhaps unknowingly, inherit the old craft of the library's copyists. There's a strange symmetry to it. The same hands that once preserved Plato now preserve the Psalms. The same meticulous copying continues, the same anxiety for accuracy, the same reverence for words. The subjects change, but the rhythm remains. Knowledge, like water, finds a new course. Still, the loss is immense. Imagine the hundreds of works we will never read. Histories, plays, scientific treatises, entire philosophies, erased not by conquest, but by neglect. Knowledge, once so proud in public, retreats into quiet rooms behind cloister walls. Centuries later, Arab scholars will arrive in Alexandria, hungry for learning. They will rebuild what they can from Greek and Roman fragments, translating and preserving much of what Europe forgot. They will copy Aristotle, Galen, and Euclid, names that once echoed in the library's halls, and send them back into the world like messages in bottles. But the library itself will never return. It exists only in fragments, in the margins of other people's books, in the memory of what it once meant to know. And as night falls over Alexandria, you stand where it once stood, on the site of the old Bruchium, the royal quarter, now long buried beneath the modern city. The wind carries dust and the scent of the sea. Somewhere beneath your feet lie the ashes of scrolls that once held all human knowledge. You realize something haunting. The library was not destroyed in a single fire. It died slowly, through centuries of indifference, through every act of certainty that silenced the question. Even today, its ghost lingers, not in ruins or relics, but in the idea that knowledge is fragile, that curiosity can vanish not only in flames, but in faith, in power, in time. And perhaps that is the truest lesson of Alexandria, that wisdom, unlike stone, cannot be built once and left to stand. It must be rebuilt over and over by each generation that dares to ask why.
Centuries pass, empires fade like ink in the sun, and Alexandria becomes just another port, its grandeur buried under dust, its library reduced to legend. But knowledge, unlike marble, is never truly lost. It drifts, migrates,
hides inside new languages. What perished in fire is reborn in translation. It begins quietly, far from the Mediterranean. In Damascus, then Baghdad, a new world awakens, the Islamic Golden Age. Here, scholars build something that feels eerily familiar, a place where books, minds, and questions gather together. The Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom. Some even called it the Heir of Alexandria. Its halls are filled with scholars from every corner of the empire. Arabs, Persians, Syrians, Jews, Christians. Greek texts are translated into Arabic, often through Syriac intermediaries. The words of Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, Ptolemy, once whispered in the library's corridors, return in new voices, new alphabets. The knowledge of the ancients, thought extinguished, flickers again. And it's not mere preservation. They do what the Alexandrians did best. They question, experiment, expand. Mathematicians refine Greek geometry with algebra. Astronomers correct Ptolemy's tables. Physicians debate Galen and improve upon him. The scholars of Baghdad, like those of Alexandria before them, live by the idea that truth is not a possession, it's a pursuit. You imagine one of them, a quiet man, hunched over parchment under an oil lamp, tracing Arabic letters where once were Greek. He doesn't think of himself as saving civilization. He's just curious, just like those old copyists of Alexandria. He's comparing numbers, testing formulas, trying to understand why the stars move the way they do. Knowledge survives because of people like him, the ones who cannot bear not to know. In time, this knowledge travels again. Through traders, pilgrims, and scholars, it crosses the Mediterranean back to Europe. Toledo, Palermo, Cordoba, the new Alexandrias of the West. Monks and translators sit with Arabic manuscripts, laboriously turning them back into Latin. They copy Alhazen's optics, Avicenna's medicine, Al-Khwarizmi's mathematics. These names will eventually fade behind their Latinized forms, but their ideas will ignite something Europe had long forgotten: curiosity. The Renaissance begins not from nothing, but from remembrance. Behind every rediscovery of Greek wisdom lies a chain of translations that runs back to the Arab scholars and through them back to Alexandria. The library spirit migrates across languages like a bird that never stops flying, only resting for a time in each new land. And yet, the myth of the library itself grows larger than its reality. By the Middle Ages, travelers speak of it in reverent tones, as if it were Eden, a place where humanity once knew everything, before pride or fire took it away. Historians argue endlessly over who burned it: Caesar, Christians, Muslims, time. Each wants the tragedy to fit their narrative. But the truth, quiet and uncomfortable, is that the library was destroyed by everyone, and by no one in particular. A careless soldier with a torch, a bishop with a decree, a clerk who chose not to copy one last scroll. Each act small, each loss invisible, until centuries later when we look back and realize how vast the silence became. In modern Alexandria, if you stand by the harbor at dusk, you can almost feel that silence. The wind smells of salt and history. Somewhere beneath the asphalt, beneath the modern streets and apartment blocks, lies the layers of that old city. Ptolemaic, Roman, Byzantine, Arab. Archaeologists find fragments sometimes, bits of papyrus, broken statues, charred stone, but the library itself is gone. Its shelves turn to legend. And yet, humans, being what we are, could not leave it at that. In 2002, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened on the same shore where the ancient one once stood. Its architecture is symbolic, a vast tilted disk of granite, like a rising sun, covered in carvings of scripts from every known language. Inside, light pours down onto millions of books. It's not a resurrection, nothing can rebuild the original, but it's an echo, a statement, that we still care. You walk through it in silence, feeling the same awe the ancients must have felt. Students sit with laptops where once scribes sat with papyrus. The tools have changed, but the posture is the same. Leaning forward, eyes moving across lines of text, chasing meaning. One floor below, a plaque quotes from the ancient library's mission: to collect all the books in the world. It feels naive and noble at once. The ambition remains impossible, yet we keep trying. First on papyrus, now on servers, clouds, and screens. And perhaps that's the final twist of the story. We think the library was destroyed, but in a sense, it has only changed form. Every digital archive, every Wikipedia entry, every scanned manuscript is part of its afterlife. The modern world, with all its noise and nonsense, is still chasing that same impossible dream: to know everything before it's lost. Still, something has been lost. Not just the texts, but the texture. Imagine holding a scroll written by hand 2,000 years ago. The papyrus slightly brittle, the ink fading, the handwriting looping elegantly, humanly imperfect. Reading wasn't just an act, it was contact with another mind literally pressed into fibers. Now we scroll with our thumbs. The words move, but we don't feel them. The library's tragedy in the end may not be that it burned, but that we no longer notice what knowledge costs. If you could speak to one of those ancient scholars, the astronomer charting the heavens, the scribe bent over his ink, you might ask them if they ever imagined a world like ours where information is endless and understanding scarce. They might smile faintly, knowing that abundance can be another kind of loss. Because what the library truly represented wasn't just knowledge, it was care. The act of copying, reading, questioning, arguing, preserving. Each was a small defiance against forgetting. It was faith, not in gods or kings, but in memory itself. And so, standing on that same shore, you realize the library never really died. It exists wherever someone wonders, why did this happen? It flickers in every classroom, every archive, every person who stays up late reading about things they'll never need to know. The Library of Alexandria was never just a building. It was the habit of the human mind: to gather, to preserve, to question, to dream of total understanding, even while knowing it's impossible. And that's why its story endures. Not because of what it contained, but because of what it meant. That knowledge is both our greatest creation and our most fragile inheritance.